Okay, I think so. Okay, thanks for having me. So I'm working at the British Antarctic Survey in the Artificial Intelligence Lab, and we are partly funded by the Alan Turing Institute. It's always good to mention one's funders so that they keep giving us money. So what I'm going to talk about is, in particular, is the Fates Glacier, which is also known as the Doomsday Glacier. At the end of January, there was quite a lot of media coverage about the Fates Glacier because there was an international expedition to the edge of it, and was very difficult to get there. Quite a few of delays because of bad weather, storms, and it is very difficult to get there because it's very, very remote, even for Antarctic reasons. So the main question is, why is it called the Doomsday Glacier? And for that, it helps to look a bit at Antarctica itself. So most of the time, we know the silhouette of Antarctica as it is in the logo of the British Antarctic Survey. It's relatively round and big. But if you actually look at the geology underneath it, a lot of Antarctica is actually below sea level. So in the bigger picture, the yellow areas are what is above sea level. Everything else is below sea level. So Antarctica is very deep, actually. So it has the deepest point on Earth, which is not covered by liquid water. It's covered by frozen water. So in some points, the ice is 4 kilometers thick. There's a lot of ice. And the Fates Glacier, it's marked down here, is in itself very big. It has about the size of Britain. And the melting from the Fates Glacier alone accounts for 4% of sea level rise. So that's a lot for just one glacier. If the Fates Glacier would melt altogether, the sea levels would rise by 0.5 meter across the world. So there's a lot of ice stored in there. But not only that, the Fates Glacier sits like a stopper at the edge of Antarctica and holds ice masses in it, which are behind it. So the ice sits in these troughs going very far down. And there is more ice loss now, and we need to start understanding the dynamics, what is happening at Antarctica. Here's a schematic about where the problem lies. The ice sits on the seafloor, and there's a grounding line where it touches the seafloor. But after the grounding line, there's water, and the ice shelf, the glacier, floats on the water. And at the front, you have iceberg carving, chunks of ice break off. The ice, when ice comes in contact with water, it starts melting more quicker, as you probably know when you have ice cubes in a drink. So the problem is also with warm water masses. It's not true that in a water column, the warmest water is at the top. It depends on the salt contact, where the warm water is, the salinity. So you can have deep warm water, which starts flowing along the ground underneath the glacier and starts melting it more. If more is melted, the front is more floating, becomes more unstable, and it can break off. So the International Fates Glacier Collaboration wants to understand what is happening, what the dynamics are, and also how much ice is actually lost. So that's where my project comes in. Our objective is to look at satellite images and identify icebergs efficiently and reliably in it, especially in near coastal regions, where you have like lots of icebergs intermingled with sea ice. We use synthetic aperture radar because that is based on electromagnetic waves and not optical waves. So we are not hampered by clouds or day and night. So that is joint work with Andrew Fleming, who's also at the British Antarctic Survey. How we go about it, we try to keep it as simple as possible, because Antarctica is huge. We have a lot of data to process. So we try to only go by the pixel intensity value. So that's the pixel value in the satellite images. We actually get 2 images. That's due to the polarization of the electromagnetic waves. Polarization means the wave is propagating either vertically or horizontally, and then it's reflected. So the radar records a horizontal image where the reflection is horizontal, and a horizontal vertical image where the reflection is vertical. And because we have 2 images per pixel, we have 2 values. And that means we can do a principal component analysis. What that means is principal component analysis means you choose the most advantageous viewpoint. That is the viewpoint where you can see most information of the data. That is then the first principal component. And I've drawn here the histogram of the pixel values in this direction. So I also pointed out that it's in the direction 0.4 and 0.9, because I will come back to that. And we can then see, well, actually, if we look in that direction, we have 3 peaks, which means we can distinguish different pixel heaps, so to speak. In the second principal component, there's not much to be seen. There's just 1 peak, which means not much information to be gained from that. And then you can plot the image in terms of the first principal component. And from the original image, it seems that light colors have become more lighter. It altogether has become lighter. And the gray is mostly sea ice. What I want to draw your attention to is the bottom left corner, where there is a relatively large iceberg shaped like a hand. I call it the hand. We will come back to that one. So once we have done that, we can do clustering. Clustering means similar data is just gathered together. The algorithm decides that itself, and the human then gives a label to the clusters it's found. And it found 4 clusters, which I then gave the label open water, because that turns out to be open water, sea ice and iceberg. And in between sea ice and iceberg, we have an ambiguous cluster, which does actually help. It's better if your algorithm doesn't tell you, I know it's sea ice or I know it's iceberg. It's better if it says, well, I'm actually not sure. So the algorithm gives every pixel a probability, what it thinks, which cluster it belongs to. So it can be, they're called assignment probabilities. It can be quite large, that's good, but it has not to do with confidence. It doesn't say the algorithm is that confident that it actually belongs to that cluster. It's just within the current model, this is the probability that it is part of the cluster. So we don't accept assignments with low probability at this end. We actually just take the top part after the penultimate peak. These ones we accept, and then we remove that data. When you remove the data, you actually change the data set, and that means you can do another principal component analysis, because the best direction to look at the data might have changed now, because we have changed the data. So it's a change of viewpoint, and that's why I mentioned the direction of the principal component. It now has changed to 0.6 and 0.8. The data I have removed is colored in black, and things before the hand was quite gray like its surroundings. It starts to stick out more. If I continue that after 4 iterations, the hand starts sticking out even more. So by changing my viewpoint repeatedly, I can see more. And finally, I arrive at an image where I have pixels colored by either open water or iceberg or sea ice and ambiguous. So That's one bit. But if you notice, it struggles with the hand because there are too many pixels there which look like sea ice pixels. And the reason why that is, if I just look at the area of the hand is, and I do my histogram again, I don't have the convenient 3 peaks. I have only 2 peaks and so on, and that's why the algorithm gets it wrong. Problem is, in the last image, in the bottom left, I've plotted the assignment probabilities. So white means nearly 1 and so on. It's not just failing, it's failing with high confidence in quotation marks because it's not a confidence, it's just the probability under the current model. But I as a human, I can distinguish this hand. And the reason is that within the hand, there are more light gray colored pixels than in the sea ice surrounding it. And to bring that out more, I can do something called convolution. A convolution is just an averaging of a pixel with surrounding pixels. It will blur the images, but what it also crucially does, it starts pulling the histogram apart. Because in the hand there are more lighter gray pixels, if I'm averaging them, they are getting emphasized. While in the sea ice there are more darker gray pixels, the darker gray gets emphasized. So I start, a peak starts appearing and it still gets it wrong and so on. But the nice thing is also it knows that the probability is low there, and I can convolute with, I can average over a larger area. It gets even more blurred, but I get the peaks are even more pulled apart. So, so that's a technique which is very common in neural networks. And that is really just what it does in convolutional neural networks, is that an averaging procedure is done to take spatial information into account. So, and in the end, once we have the identification of icebergs, we can estimate from their surface how big they are, we can calculate the volume, and then we can calculate how much ice is lost. And if we take satellite images over several days, we can also calculate how much worse it gets over time, or whether it stays the same, or the main thing is to understand what's going on because we know too little. And I want to end my presentation by thanking the team around me of the Artificial Intelligence Lab, because we are all nothing without a good team around us. So thank you.
Brilliant. Thanks for that, Anita. Really interesting presentation. As I say, get some of the questions in you might have for the end. But without further ado, I want to go into our next talk, which is Lauren Kuntz. Laura is the co-founder and CEO of Gaiaiscope, a company working to harness the power of AI for electric grid applications and accelerate our energy transition. Laura founded Gaiaiscope having completed her PhD in Earth and Planetary Science at Harvard University. And this evening, Laura will be speaking on the opportunity for combined AI and physics-based models in grid appliances. Over to you, Laura.
Thank you. Let's see. Are you able to see my screen?
Yep, we're seeing it.
Awesome. Cool. So my objective of this talk today is kind of give you a small snapshot inside of the work that we do here at Gaiaiscope, and I think more broadly really convince you of all of the opportunities that exist for AI to really help in the energy transformation that we're already starting to see happen across the world, and that we fundamentally need to see happen faster. So to begin with, I just want to start talking about sort of what is this energy transformation that we need to see? What's the challenge at hand? And this is a graph I really think illustrates it well. It's showing you over the past over 150 years how our energy consumption has changed. And what you're seeing in red here is all sort of fossil fuel based consumption of energy. versus everything in green that we're seeing, that's more of what we'd consider probably a carbon neutral. And when we talk about decarbonizing our whole energy system, what we're talking about is trying to figure out ways to replace this red fossil-based energy with green alternatives. And to make this challenge even harder, what we probably expect is that our energy demand is going to keep growing. Maybe not uniformly across the world, but for certain areas, you're absolutely going to see it grow. And what we're really talking about is taking this green and growing it up to meet that growing demand. And you can look at this graph and you can say like, wow, that is a big challenge that we are facing when it comes to decarbonizing our energy system and combating climate change. But you can also look at it and say like, wow, that is a massive opportunity. We are about to see really big changes in how we consume and how we use energy. And I personally think that AI has the potential to play a really big role in not just helping this transition take place, but also accelerating it. And when we talk about kind of what could fill that sort of big green triangle, what can help, there's really three alternatives to fossil-based energy. The first is electrify as much as you possibly can and then power that energy from carbon-free electricity. The second is whatever you can't electrify, you can just use alternative liquid fuels with. And then lastly, you can reduce consumption. Those are kind of like the three levers that we have in sort of transforming that graph into something new. And I've gone through and taught many students about how to decarbonize the grid and how to sort of decarbonize the energy system. And what almost everybody does when they tackle this problem initially is they choose to go with provide as much energy with electricity as possible and decarbonize the grid. And for that reason, the grid and the ability to run it in a low carbon manner becomes integral to this problem at large. So at Gaiaiscope, we really focus a lot on the electric grid. That's kind of the bread and butter because we really view that as like, if you cannot get the electric grid piece right, the rest of this problem becomes even more challenging. So when we talk about the grid, it's really important to think about what is the current grid that we're starting with? What is our base point and how does it need to change moving into the future? So right now, most places around the world, the grid is really based on this view of top-down control. Demand, so how much we as consumers use of electricity, is kind of viewed as like completely uncontrollable. It is what it is. And generators are dispatched in order to always follow that demand. You basically have a state where you always have to make sure that demand is perfectly matched by generation, or you could risk a blackout. And there is one really big benefit of the current types of power we have on the grid, and that is the fact that they add inertia to the grid. The fact that so many of these generators are fossil-based and are actual physical masses, large masses that are spinning, adds stability so that if some disturbance occurs, you still have the momentum of that spinning device that's able to kind of keep things sort of really rolling into massive blackouts. So that's the current state of things. It uses a lot of physical models to do different analyses that are important, not only in sort of like planning hour to hour, but also long-term planning. And those analyses are pretty computationally complex, somewhat cumbersome, and in many ways hinder moving to the future grid. So when we talk about a future grid that is largely decarbonized, the picture starts to change a bit in terms of what is necessary. In a future grid that relies on a lot of renewables, you're going to have volatility not only from your demand side of the picture, but now also from the generation side of the picture. You're no longer able to control exactly whenever a generator is operating and how much they're producing. That's now dictated partly by weather. And then that component of it, that makes it a bit harder to predict. You now have to worry about what is the wind going to be over the next 24 or 48 hours out. You have to worry about the sun as well. And you also then have that uncertainty around load. You also start to lose some of that stability of the built-in inertia. So if you have some sort of disturbance on the grid, you don't have as much of those large spinning masses that are able to help balance it out in real time. And what you need here is you really need rapid and adaptive controls and models of this system. And to me, that really just screams, this is an opportunity for AI. There's so much here that AI could help with. And to give you a small sampling of it, grid control is a big problem that I think AI has a lot of applications for. One is just with sort of integration of this intermittent generation with dispatchable resources. Across different timescales, you're going to have to not only predict, but also make rapid decisions about what power plant should be ramping up, what should be ramping down, and making sure these seamlessly fit together. With an increase in distributed generation also likely being part of the solution, you also have to think a lot more about how transmission constraints might be impacted. And you also need to think there's way more information that you need to be pulling from the grid. Instead of having maybe 10, 20, 100 power plants on there, you could potentially have thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, isolated places that are all generating and consuming power. How you communicate that, how you model that, all becomes extremely important. Storage likely is going to start playing a bigger role, and different models of when should you charge it, when should you discharge it, are more questions that AI could help with, as well as the potential for demand response. We've really historically viewed it as demand is what it is and we can't change it. But moving forward, there's a lot of opportunity to maybe temporally shift when we consume energy and how we consume it, and better help balance out that intermittent generation. But all of that is going to require a lot more control structure than we currently have, and a lot of the physical algorithms that we use that are based off fundamental laws of physics don't necessarily have kind of the rapid ability to evaluate solutions that you would need in a lot of these contexts, especially ones at quick timescales that need instantaneous results. There's also, on the grid design side of things, another opportunity for AI. We know moving forward that there's going to be an increase in electrification. We're going to probably be adding electric vehicles to the load, as well as many other things, potentially heat pumps, and things that previously had been fossil fuels are probably going to be shifting towards more renewables and more grid-based power. So with growing load, you know that you're going to need to be increasing your whole electric grid system. And that raises the question of how do you intelligently site new assets? Given that more load is going to be added on, where is it going to be added on, and how do you decide where to build? And those questions, again, are extremely difficult to think through, and ones where AI could help us. Now, I've just made this argument of like why AI could answer a lot of these questions, but I think it's also important to step back and say, what are the challenges that AI needs to make sure they can meet before they actually can address a lot of these? And to me, the first and foremost is that the reliability of the grid and maintaining safety is extremely important. And it's one that AI absolutely has to be able to ensure that they do well in order for an algorithm to be effective. So I think a big question that comes out of this is, how do you ensure the physical feasibility of AI models? How do you ensure that if you have an AI model that's deciding when to dispatch a battery or when to charge it, it doesn't violate the parameters of that battery? It doesn't try to do it faster than the battery is capable of, or it doesn't try to do it beyond what the battery can hold. Or if you're thinking about sort of at a grid level application, like how do you make sure that it's never going to try to dispatch a generator that is offline for some reason? And because safety is so integral here, that's really this high cost for an incorrect algorithm output. Unlike AI that's maybe doing ad-based sort of curation of what you see on your Instagram feed or your Facebook feed, where if it targets me with something that's really not relevant, it doesn't really impact my life. Here, there's a really high cost if the algorithm gets something wrong. If it tries to operate the grid in a way that's not possible, you could see rolling blackouts, and rolling blackouts have a massive economic cost and sometimes can even cost lives depending on how long they take to fix. So this question of safety and reliability is integral to the AI answering, and it's integral to really being able to understand and use this application in the grid. The other really fun and unique challenge, I think, of the grid and AI applications here is that it's non-stationary. The underlying network structure is constantly changing, and that's kind of like the one guarantee of the grid, is you're always going to see new places of load, you're always going to see new lines coming online and new generators being added. And this dynamic nature of the grid means that it becomes really hard for AI to just use historical data. Because what the grid looked like 2 years ago isn't what it looks like now, and oftentimes it's different enough that it's not even usable data anymore. So it becomes this challenge of how do you get enough historical and training examples that are still relevant that your AI could do well with. And that's really where I make the argument of why potentially combining AI with physics-based models is so powerful. And this is kind of the core of what we at Gaiaiscope are trying to do. And there's a lot of other people also out there trying to sort of figure out how can you take AI but link it more with a physics-based fundamental understanding of what's going on in the world. So one idea that's been out there is this idea of just creating AI emulators. So if you have a complex physical simulation like you often have in the grid, there's the idea of, well, just train an AI to reproduce whatever that physical model did. And there's a group that Chasm et al. Was leading, where they tried this with a global climate model. And they were able to see a massive improvement in the computational speed of running this GCM when they took a lot of training examples from the global climate model and trained an AI to basically reproduce the results. And they had like 1 billion times faster that this was able to help. And this is huge when you think about a really diverse grid with a lot of individual components that need rapid evaluation, rapid decision making on it. The speed improvement could be really vital. However, the one challenge here is there is not exactly that guarantee of physical feasibility, especially when you're outside the range of what your model's been trained on. You can definitely, there's no guarantee that it's going to do something that's like within your bounds of what is safe and reliable. The second idea out there, which a group out of CMU led by Zico Coulter is working on, is the idea of embedding physical simulations within layers of a neural network. So within this neural network, they basically take input data, they encode it, and then they predict it using an actual physical simulator still. So most of the problems we have on the grid are really, there are physical equations to describe them, like there's physical laws of power flow. So you could still use those exact same physical laws, just embedded within some sort of neural network or other type of learning algorithm. And that's going to guarantee that the solution you get still obeys all the laws of physics. The challenge here, though, is while you're guaranteeing that the laws of physics have obeyed, that your grid is going to operate safely, you're not necessarily getting that benefit of speed up that AI provides. There's other big benefits you could get here, but maybe not always in the right place where you need them. And then a third idea that's kind of out there being explored is from PNNL. Jan Dragna is leading some work where he's trying to build in the physical structure of the problem into how he actually creates the network. So what's connected to what? And he's been doing this work on specifically building heat and controlling when heating occurs in a building. And the idea being, rather than just the weights randomly connecting, make sure that they tie in that each individual weight could reflect an actual physical quality. So one of the weights might be for specific heat capacity. The idea being here that if you can create this structural similarity, you have much more understanding of what the model is doing and why. And you can also go in and add penalties for when one of these physical constraints of your model, of your building here, is violated. So at Gaiaiscope, this is kind of the core of our approach to the model of how do we combine AI and physical models for grid scale applications. And the goal is to prove that this is possible, that it is feasible, and that we could use this in many areas. And right now, we really focus on short timescale market predictions. So we're focusing on trying to predict prices over the next 14 to 38 hours. At the moment, we're using those prices to trade. But the really core of what we're building is this idea that AI and physical models can work together. And just to kind of give you a taste of like, these are all big ideas that we're throwing out, but I think as with so many problems in data science and AI, a lot of the challenges that actually end up being like the big pain is really just related to data quality and cleaning. We pull so much data from so many different places. And one of the biggest banes that I am working on right now is just working through inconsistent naming conventions. So depending on the data source from the grid, you'll have all sorts of different names that might occur for an individual generator, and just matching these up is always a problem. So even though we're working on these really big novel ideas, I think even just that small detail stuff really matters. And we're kind of always getting caught up in that as well. So just quickly to conclude, if you can remember nothing else, these are the 3 points that I really hope you take away from this. The first is that I view there's a big opportunity for AI when it comes to grid infrastructure and to shifting to carbon-free sources. The things that we're working on at Gaiaiscope is a small piece of that, and there's a lot more out there. In order to address these challenges and help on the grid, guaranteeing reliability and safety is incredibly important and one of the unique challenges that AI faces in this area. But fundamentally, there are strategies that hold a lot of promise, the ability to combine AI and physical models to meet those requirements of reliability and safety. And with that, I'll say thank you so much.
Thank you, Lauren. That was brilliant. We got a few hands raised from the attendees. So just quickly want to remind everyone, if you do have any questions, get your hands raised on the app and we can put those to our speakers at the end. Thanks again, Lauren.
First, before we go to the next one, fine too.
Yeah, just to quickly grow into the next talk. Up next is Topher White, CEO and founder of Rainforest Connection. Topher holds a background primarily in physics, software development and communication, having received a degree in physics at Kenyon College. Topher will be presenting on the Internet of Wild Things. Over to you, Topher.
Thanks a lot. Appreciate it. You guys can hear me, right? Yes? All right.
Yeah.
So this is actually going to be a little bit less technical than the other ones, but I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here and see how well we go. Okay, so at Rainforest Connection, you guys can see this now, I guess, right? You seen that? A slide. Okay, yes. So at Rainforest Connection, we are largely focused on this idea that we can use sound, not just study, but to protect the wild places of the world, in particular forests. And a lot of this comes out of this idea that we want to be able to stop illegal logging, right? How are we actually going to stop illegal logging? Well, there's lots of technology that's being used right now to help do this. Satellites are a really, really powerful tool for being able to measure, the global state of forests on a very sort of imprecise degree. Drones, of course, are a solution to most things for monitoring forest cover. Camera traps are great for being able to catch, measure species and wildlife as it moves through the forest, as well as capture illegal activity in the forest. Community monitoring is really important as well, and planes. But all of these solutions that you see here don't allow necessarily real-time intervention in remote areas where illegal logging is taking place. And so this is the solution of Rainforest Connection. Like the moment that a chainsaw is used in the forest, sound is picked up by these devices up in trees, it transmits up through the cloud to rangers on the ground that we work with, who are able to get in the alert, and they jump on their motorcycles and they get out there and they stop the logging in the act, in that very realistic rendition of exactly how it happens in the forest. But to do this, of course, you need to have a device up in the treetops. And for us, we like to use kind of recycled products. So old phones are fantastic little computers. We put them in boxes with solar panels and powerful microphones. They can listen to all the sounds of the forest. They stay powered for months and years at a time. And they're able to be those kind of ears in the forest. And of course, we're using old trash in a lot of these cases, and we can use cell phone networks that, believe it or not, actually exist off in the periphery of these wild places. This is me putting one together in the garage in Silicon Valley, which is an obligatory part of any startup presentation. But this is one up in a tree. But really, it's actually backup for, so the first time we tested this was in Indonesia, around the place where we sort of saw this to be an issue, put one up, and on the second day, picked up the sounds of chainsaws, very, very early for success, and people were able to get out there and stop it. So this for us was early success that helped us kind of jump out there to see whether we could make it work in these places and others. You guys can hear the chainsaws here, I guess. Yeah. One thing you can probably note is that chainsaws are pretty easy to pick out from the sounds of the forest when they're close up. The way the system works, I don't have to tell you guys this, but it's highly automated. So we're able to pick out the sounds of chainsaws automatically. There's no one listening to the sounds of chainsaws or sounds of the forest overall, because again, we are monitoring 24/7. And that's what we'll get into in AI in a little bit. But let's back up for one quick second and talk about climate change overall, or why to do this overall, because saving the rainforest is a very it's a classic idea as far as our generations are concerned. But it turns out that even in the talk of climate change, Deforestation is the second largest contributor to climate change, more than all the transportation, cars, trucks, planes, ships combined. None of that adds up to the deforestation footprint. And legal logging in the rainforest makes up to 90%, between 50 and 90% of the logging that takes place. And if it's illegal, there's a mandate to stop it. And so working with local people on the ground, the partners that we build in these places, they actually can take a big bite out of that equation. And illegal logging, of course, is only one way in which the forests get cut down. But illegal logging is so profitable that they will go in to extract the very high-priced trees, and that will be what will allow them to make these roads. And once a road is there, what you see is there's this wholesale destruction of the forest. So if you can stop illegal logging, you can stop the roads, the illegal roads. And if you stop the illegal roads, you can stop the wholesale destruction of the forest. And that could be one of the fastest, cheapest ways for us to fight climate change today. But of course, it's not police or the rest of us working on these. It's people on the ground we have to work with. So just based on that calculus, one device, these call them guardians, they can hear sounds and send alerts for up to 3 square kilometers of forest, because sound travels very well through the forest. That's 15,000 tons of CO2, equivalent to 3,000 cars off the road for a year. So you can see the high impact of just protecting relatively modest amounts of a forest and working with people that can do that. So let's actually take it to a larger use case we've been doing for a few years. Here we are in the Amazon. It's, you can see this ocean of deforestation in the Amazon, but these islands of pretty intact forest. Those are not protected areas in the traditional sense. Those are actually indigenous areas. This here is the Tembe Reserve, this red line, and this here is the Tembe tribe. There's about 1,500 of them left, and they themselves sort of have the autonomy in this area, but there's no real police or law enforcement in the area, which is why this entire purple area, when we met them in 2014, was occupied by illegal loggers, settlers, and drug cartels. So that even just moving from one town to the next, they would come across these fully stocked, brand new trucks full of wood, and really the Tembe themselves couldn't really do anything except just get out of there as soon as possible. So that for them, it was kind of an existential threat, was to be able to stop the logging in these areas. And of course, these are the best partners for us to work with, because even if there's no law enforcement in the area, they are the law and order to be imposed. Fortunately for that, again, it's a small population, but they train 30 rangers, young rangers, to take responsibility for this and to take the matters into their own hands. So as far as our system is concerned, one of the advantages here is that even though this is pretty remote, you can see that there's actually cell phone service on the outskirts, but this area here is the size of Yosemite National Park, that white outline that you see. It's a huge, huge area, 2,500 square kilometers. And so 30 rangers spread across that area, you need some sort of monitoring technique to help them get to where they need to go at the right times. And so here is our system working with, a close-up chainsaw. Hold on, I'll shut up for a second. Make sure this one's chainsaws. Great. So essentially what you see here, let's pause this for a second. No, not gonna pause it. We'll stop in a moment. I'll mute it, there we are. So essentially we're using a CNN spread across, we're using spectrograms as the audio comes in. And again, this is continuous audio from hundreds of nodes around the world. As it comes in, we divide the audio up into short windows and then run a CNN model that's trained continuously on these to pick out chainsaws. The CNNs are, again, this is important because chainsaws, we hope, are a fairly rare instance, but when they're there, you want to have a high confidence of being able to alert people, because if they're going to go running off into the forest to stop the loggers, the stakes of them getting it wrong are pretty high. That becomes especially important when you start to look at the actual data that comes in. So that was a very close one. That was at about 200, 300 meters. I'm not sure exactly. But here's a situation where AI and CNNs really come in handy, where I'll just stop talking. So especially over Zoom, not sure whether you can hear it, but this is a chainsaw at over 1 kilometer away. And this is a situation where even if you were in the forest, you might not hear it, but the CNN is able to pick that out pretty well. To the effect that I don't have to tell a lot of you, a very, very sensitive model for CNNs is not actually always the best case, because you want people to know that where they're going is close to where the actual event is taking place. And so as we go into this, we're finding that increasingly we're looking for different models for different sensitivities for what we're looking for. But again, in this particular case, we were able to scramble and they out to the edge of the territory where they were able to catch that truck, seize the gear, take it down, burn the tractors, burn the truck, take people into custody, and stop that logging. This is an example of how, you know, this guy, this one guy here, he's, well, him and his colleagues, his fellow warriors are actually having a huge effect potentially on protecting these forests and on climate change. So sometimes the best technology that we can build are the ones to help people out there who are taking this outsized, who are able to realize this outsized impact through their work in their local communities. So it's really amazing to think that someone like this can have an effect on the global sort of climate change crisis. But again, so this is not just in Brazil. We do this all over the world. 14 countries, you know, about over 3,300 square kilometers of forest protected with partnerships very similar to that. What that looks like, again, this I believe is in Brazil. You know, we have it going in Peru with more partners exactly like that. This is in Indonesia, again, where we began, where they were able to seize the loggers and stop them. In a lot of these cases, the faster you can get there, the better. Again, we don't want to just be catching logs or trucks full of wood on the way out. That's already damage done. So for us, our goal is to make sure that we can get people there and spend time to stop the loggers, which is safer for the loggers and for the rangers who are going to stop them. But it's not just about, you know, stopping loggers in the forest. What else can we do with this? So every single one of our guardians, we call them, these devices up in trees, is streaming continuous audio up to the cloud. And so we also make it possible for anyone, I highly suggest you check it out, to download our app and listen in live to any of these streams from around the world, and also to the archives. But with that in mind, we can also make use of that data in different ways. So it's not just about catching loggers, it's about being able to measure some of these ecosystems as well. So here we have a live feed, we have a feed coming from Sumatra, and the extent to which you can really use AI and CNNs to pick out individual species and map biodiversity is pretty intense. So here's an example. Yeah. So the idea behind this is that we can not just map out where all the different species are interacting with each other, the extent to which they overlap or do not, but you're not just doing this over a few seconds or a few minutes. Because we have the continuous streams and because it's in the cloud and because we're building collaborative tools, you end up being able to do this very precise analysis over days, months, and potentially even years of continuous audio and see the changes that can take place, not even just over seasonality, but potentially over you know, loss of ecosystems in the area, and hopefully even over changes in climate. So a lot of what we're trying to do with these large data sets is have these precise measurements on a big data level to be able to measure how healthy these ecosystems are and the impacts that we have over time. To facilitate that, we're also launching a whole new bioacoustics platform. The example for here is being able to pick out, well, this is actually from a live feed coming from Vancouver Bay, where we're able to notice when orcas kind of gather in a very rare occurrence. Actually, I can show you over here. I'll pause this for a second. This is basically a year of audio coming through here, and it was just these very precise moments when the orcas actually showed up, or the humpbacks showed up. But being able to use AI to pick out these very rare occurrences from really a you know, huge stream of data is important to us. And this is a tool that we will launch in the next couple of months to allow scientists to help to study these ecosystems that we think that we have these huge data sets. How can they use it to measure the impacts of climate change and of biodiversity, of ecosystem loss? So that is Rainforest Connection, the hardware. Again, we are explaining into many more places thanks to our partners, and we hope to essentially triple our impact, even with the delays we're seeing this year and the dangers that we're seeing in a lot of these places around the world. We hope to triple our impact. And it's really just being able to say that 6,000 square kilometers of forest, which is pretty modest, is equivalent to taking 6 million cars off the road. It's really pretty humbling to be in that space. And we hope that this can drive a larger sense of change. But the tools that we're building around science to be able to protect these large areas and to study them. This is the Acoustic Explorer, to be able to zoom in and actually see what's happening at this very micro level of biodiversity. At the same time, zoom out and see it over the course of a year. We hope these scientific tools can help to understand and leverage, a greater number of people who are not in the forest to understand and protect it. Thanks a lot. Rainforest Connection.
Brilliant. Thanks, Topher. Topher and I actually had the chance to connect in January for an interview during one of our summits. So if you'd like to hear a little bit more about Rainforest Connection, pop over to our YouTube channel as it's hosted there. So obviously that concludes our talks. If you have any questions for any of our speakers, remember to raise a hand. I can unmute you and you can connect with them directly. However, we do have a few pre-submitted questions to kick off with. The first was actually for Anita, and somebody's asked, are there any limitations to using radar satellite imagery depending on if the icebergs are in the open ocean versus sea ice pack?
You're muted, by the way, Anita.
Thank you. It's actually easier to see icebergs in the open ocean than near the coastal region and within sea ice. So it's the challenge is more to go into the coastal regions, and we are managing that. One thing is that often icebergs are classified by size. So normally people only start counting from 0.1 square kilometers upwards, but we can go lower than that because we just base it on pixels, and 1 pixel is 50 by 50 meters. So it can also pick up very small icebergs, but one has to be careful with false positives. Yes.
Okay. The next was for Lauren. So one of the attendees asked, how can AI be used in renewable energy to manage intermittency, offer improved safety and reliability?
Yeah, so one of the big areas that's a challenge for renewables and intermittency is just the predictability of it. Right now, a lot of the predictability comes from just weather models, which are generally large scale, rely on assimilating a lot of data before you run this physical model that's simulating the atmosphere and forecasting many hours out. And there's a number of places in that whole chain that you could actually use AI to improve the predictability of it. One is with just the data assimilation piece of it. That's a very long process, and you're pulling in all sorts of different data from airplanes, from satellites, from ground-based measurements, from radar. And doing a better job, AI has the potential to speed that process up and just create a better initial condition from which to run your actual weather model. The second is you could do really localized AI for renewables and try to get at different timescales of what is the most relevant data. Could I maybe install sensors right at my renewable location site that could improve the forecast? And a better forecast just makes it a lot easier. If I know whether it's going to be sunny or windy tomorrow and how much, it just makes it a lot easier to plan out the rest of the grid operations around it so that you don't have to curtail as much wind and solar, and you can be prepared for it.
Great. And another kind of follow-up, if that's okay, Lauren. Somebody else asked, will the integration of AI help renewable energy suppliers expand the marketplace?
Yeah, so I mean, that's kind of core to what we are trying to do at Gaiaiscope. A lot of right now, the way that renewables, at least in the US, are built is with purchase power agreements, where you have to find somebody that's willing to agree to pay you a fixed price for every megawatt you produce. And a lot of financiers really look at sort of, what is that fixed price? Can you find somebody to do it? Okay, you did, I'll give you a loan. And very few people actually are able to ask the question and answer, well, what is the market price that you're going to be paid from the grid based off when you're producing, when people are using power, and the transmission around you? That is a much harder question to answer because it really depends on temporal variability, as well as exactly what's happening on the rest of the grid at the moment you're producing power. So the hope is if you have these AIs that can somehow sort of emulate or simulate in a way that's very realistic an actual physical model of the grid, you could start getting a sense ahead of time of where are the most profitable places to build. Where could I build where that my profile of wind and solar is going to match really well with prices that exist currently on the grid, and in the future, given what I think demand might look like and how other projects might be placed, is still going to be profitable in that open market without a PPA.
Okay, brilliant. And one for Topher, if possible. I know we kind of touched on this in January, but obviously for the people that are online tonight, a few of the questions pre-submitted for you were surrounding scalability of the product and how that could potentially be a roadblock for you. Is that possible you could just touch on?
Sure. This is kind of what we're dealing with now. Again, anything you are trying to put up in the forest, there is a scalability issue. A lot of what we're trying to do with the tools that it shows you are to make inputs to the system not be reliant upon our hardware, to make it possible for a lot of the other acoustic monitoring that's out there to feed in and still take advantage of the analysis tools and the alert capabilities of the overall system. But at the end of the day, a lot of what we do, it's with hardware. There's a really wise guy from OpenRV, David Lang, who once said that every startup goes through scaling. It's like to build the first 10, and that's a totally different problem. The next 100, then the first 1,000 is totally different from the next 10,000. And we're currently in the latter stages of those stages. But we're sort of coming across these things as we arrive. At the end of the day, the reason we're using old phones as well is because there might come a day in the future where we don't have to build big hardware rigs to go up in the trees at all. That there is a point where this sort of the trash, the detritus of our normal internet usage can be used to help protect these areas, and that's kind of, we're trying different angles on that. But we're at the stage now where we are attempting to deploy thousands of them, and even that's just by amount of forest you can protect with a single one of them can have a big impact. But hopefully we can get to a higher scale over time.
Okay, brilliant. Obviously we're running a little bit fine on time. So I just want to encourage everybody that's been online tonight to follow our speakers, Topher, Lauren and Anita, follow their incentives and connect with them on LinkedIn, where you can further discuss their incentives and support them in any way you can. And secondly, I really just want to thank speakers tonight. I really appreciate your time and your presentations, as I'm sure the attendees do as well. But finally, I just want to remind everyone that we do have further waiver education webinars happening, so make sure to check out the website if any of those are of interest. Yeah, thank you again, guys. Really appreciate your time. And yeah, everybody connect with the brilliant speakers on LinkedIn.
Great to meet you all.
Cool.
Thanks again.
Thanks,
have a great day.
Thanks, guys. Really appreciate it.
Thanks.
Cheers.